Hello, everyone. Jason here. Today I chose a book called Funny Bones. Duncan Tanatha is the author and illustrator of this book. The publisher is Abrams Books for Young Readers. The copyright was 2015. It is a biography, 34 pages, and age appropriate for about 5 to 8 year olds, somewhere in there. The book Funny Bones is a picture biography of a man named Jose Guadalupe. Jose is the man behind most of the Cavaliere, meaning skull drawings that we see. The Day of the Dead is a celebration in Mexico that is mostly because of Jose. Jose was born in 1952 in the city of Aguascalientes. He was the sixth of 8 children. His older brother was a teacher and taught Jose how to read and write. And then Jose's brother noticed he could draw really well from a young age and helped get him into a local art academy. And then when Jose turned 18, he got a job at a print shop where he discovered his passion for printing. He learned lithography, he learned engraving techniques so he could start producing stuff in larger numbers. And in his early years before drawing the Cavaliere, which he became famous for, after work, he would hang around and draw cartoons in a local shop with other artists. Well, one of his cartoons that was making fun of local politicians ended up in a local newspaper. And a lot of the people locally laughed at the cartoons, but obviously the politicians that were in power weren't so happy. And so Jose had to move to another city called Leon and to avoid trouble, which he lived there for a lot of years, almost 20. And people started calling him Don Lupe as a sign of respect because of how good his work was. Then in 1888, there was a large flood. It destroyed his shop. So at that point, Don Lupe moved to Mexico City with his wife and kid, and he would work for several print shops doing the lithography and the drawings. And there was one man, Antonio Vengas, which was one of the men Don Lupe worked for. Antonio would print these things called broadsides, which were just large sheets of bright paper and would have stories on them with a wide range of topics: scary creatures, miracles, crimes, heroes, etc. Well, a lot of people started to buy these broadsides even though they couldn't read because Don Lupe's drawings were so good and intriguing. They would purchase these things even not being able to read. And so Don and Antonio worked together for over 20 years. And then finally one year during what they call the Dia del Muertos, or celebration, which people would bring out offerings to their loved ones who had passed. Don Lupe got the idea to start drawing Cavalieres, and when they would do them, they would put short stories on him with they would use lithographs and draw these skeletons, but they'd make them happy, and they would put short stories or poems with them. Like I said, they're not scary at all like Halloween. They're always happy, and they cover a wide range of topics throughout the year as they started, mass producing them and making them into using them for other ideas. So Don Lupe, though, over the years, he had thousands of drawings, but he's most famous for the Cavalieres, which he actually only made a few hundred of. Like one day he saw a lady in a park, and she was dressed real fancy and had a big hat or whatever, and was kind of uppity to some of the other peasants in the park, or what she considered peasants. And so Don Lupe drew one of these Cavaliere drawings and mass produced it, where it had like the lady as a skeleton with her fancy hat, and the other peasants all as skeletons, also basically saying, one day it doesn't matter how rich you are, we're all going to end up in the same place. And he would do this many times over many matters. Another thing, he saw a lot of changes in his life because of the years, like with transportation. As we went, it started getting faster and faster and faster. So one day he drew skeletons that were racing and trampling each other. Some of them had bicycles, and trains were starting to come in, and basically saying the faster we go, it doesn't really matter. We're all going to finish the same as a Cavaliere. Don Lupe died on January 20th, 1913, and at the time of his death, people were familiar with his works, but no one really knew who the artist was. when he died. Like, a lot of people really didn't know who he was until later. historians and artists wondered who could draw such great work, and they ended up tracing the work back to Don Lupe. And nowadays, we don't call him Don Lupe anymore. Today, he is called Posada, and that's because that's the name he actually signed his work with, which wasn't his real name or his, name that people called him by. The story's good for kids. I mean, they'll learn a lot about history. Most of the kids have seen the drawings by Posada, but they're not going to know anything about him. I didn't. But I've seen his drawings. The drawings have great detail, and they really draw you in with your attention, and really allow kids to use their imagination in the book. Toward the end of the book, there are many of Posada's drawings and different situations that'll teach you kids, like whether you're rich or poor. If you run a large company or you're a janitor, we all end up in the same place as Cavalieri's. And then for this book, this is kind of his first little Cavalieri, and there's a little poem there at the bottom. It was a warm afternoon in the middle of May. Mr. Bones grabbed his hat, went walking that day. When he noticed a beauty on the opposite street, he ran towards her, kneeled at her feet. You are the prettiest girl I've seen in my life. Please marry me. Please be my wife. I'm sorry, senor, but that cannot be. You're handsome and all, but you're too skinny for me. So, like I said, they would write little funny poems or things like that. Here's a few of the other little, pictures. Here's the one we talked about with the fancy lady in the hat, saying basically it doesn't matter. You're going to wind up, no matter how fancy you are, you're going to be dead. Here's one of his drawings where we talked about with the transportation. So, no, it's a good book. And then what I did for this was I came up with basically I would have my kids do a Venn diagram, and we would talk about the Day of the Dead celebration versus Halloween in the United States.